Hey everybody, what is going on? I am Maximus Rex and this is Big Baby Reviews. Today is Greg Capullo Day, so we're looking at some of his early work at Marvel with QUASAR. This is issue number 22, cover dated May 1991. Gonna be honest with you, went through this book before the review and this is gonna be a pretty short one because it's just not that much as interesting visually. Still the early days of Greg Capullo, being inked by someone I don't think is best suited to his style. In a few issues still, he'll be inking, but then eventually we'll move on to an inker that I think complements at least this period of Greg Capullo style much better. The inker that we've got now is basically kind of just reverting back to the typical, 80s Marvel house style, and I just don't think it's doing Greg Capullo stuff justice, even though this is probably early on. He still has some little bit of amateurish things to get rid of in his artwork. So I'll just focus on what's great art-wise and not too much on the story because it's really boring. I gotta be honest. I'm not quite sure what Marvel's thinking with this title. This is pre-Image, so I guess before the Image Revolution, stuff like this still sold a fair amount of books, but it's just, no offense to the writer, Mark Gruenland, just not my kind of stuff. And a pretty boring issue overall. QUASAR basically spends the whole issue tied up and being tortured. There's some interesting sequences that I'll point out, but like I said, this will be pretty quick for today's review. So starting with the cover, this could have been drawn by anybody. I don't recognize much Greg Capullo there. Maybe it has to do a lot with the inker on this, Keith Williams, who, as I said, I just don't think is particularly suited to Greg Capullo. Kind of, brings Greg Capullo style into the Marvel's 80s house style, where really it should be going a little bit forward towards the 90s and a little bit of that Image style that eventually he'll work into his X-Force run, and then later on more of the McFarlane style that he'll work into obviously when he's working on Spawn. So the best thing about the cover, I think, is this shot of Death here, the Grim Reaper, whoever that's supposed to be, which I think looks pretty darn good, and for once the inking on it is interesting. Not sure if Greg Capullo inked this himself or if Keith Williams did. Anyways, that's it for the cover. Let's have a look inside. And like I said, I'll get through this one pretty quickly. Pretty cool splash image to get us started off, but we've still got some of that horrible star inking that I mentioned on yesterday's review with the Ray. I thought the star, the white medium inking of the stars in the Ray's space backgrounds were a lot better and more evocative. Here it just feels kind of just quickly done. So kind of a funny image here because we've got the Watcher who watches, and then we got this guy watching the Watcher. So there's all sorts of levels there on this splash page. And again, I'm going to mention the fact that QUASAR's name is Wendell Vaughn. It's just, not the coolest name. Mark Gruenwald writer, Greg Capullo penciler, Keith Williams inker, Janice Chang letter, and Paul Beckton colorist. I've talked also about how I feel the colors don't really help this book much. I feel like they could be a little bit more vibrant, a little brighter and more saturated. There are instances where I feel like it works though, and I'll point those out as well. So not much to say about this sequence here, but I really do like this establishing shot. Okay, so QUASAR's a small part of this image, kind of tied up here, as you'll see, with some cosmic, I guess, ropes or gauntlets, whatever you want to call those. But I really do think, Greg Capullo had to have spent a lot of time on this background here, probably photo reference, but did a really good job of it. And, just the slightly monochromatic coloring is fine, I guess. And this is where I feel like, if the colors were a bit brighter, I feel like QUASAR would stand out a little bit more. It would need to stand out a little bit more in this shot. So as he's tied up, I thought this was kind of visually interesting. This character shows up here who's basically pure silhouette with no highlights or definition or anything, and a white cape, so we do get some of the folds and stuff. It works pretty well in some of these panels, right, where some parts he blends into the shadows of the background. Works pretty well. We still get the sense that this is a face, but there are other panels where I don't feel it works quite as well, like this one here, right? Like we get it, but it just feels like a lot is lost there, and there's not much detail giving us the information that we want in the panel or that we need to figure out what's going on. And the shadows on QUASAR's face here, I feel like the inker probably added or modified somewhat, because this image here does not feel like anything I've seen from Greg Capullo all throughout his career, early or late. So it does not feel like Greg Capullo at all, and that's kind of my problem with the inking. Sometimes the Greg Capullo shines through, other times not so much. So he's got kind of a hallucination of Captain Marvel, right? If you know anything about QUASAR, some of his the nega bands, I guess, were Captain Marvel's first before QUASAR. Here's where I recognize some Greg Capullo in his depiction of the ladies. Again, the aesthetic on top of them has changed over the years, but his basic building blocks and how he does lady faces and stuff has pretty much remained consistent throughout his career. So that's where I see a little bit more resemblance with the stuff he does today. And even funny enough, just this part of this guy's face here, the inking is all wrong on it, but it definitely feels like a Greg Capullo face. So slowly but surely, I guess, he's just starting out, but I feel like slowly but surely he'll start asserting his powers. This is kind of a weird sequence where, they're touching Quasar's negabands and kind of getting somewhat turned on by it, right? Just a weird sequence. The character here, lose yourself in the dance of particles about us. Let your minds and bodies go. Experience the rapture of submitting to the unknowable. Yeah, just weird sexual undertones there. So we've got more of their conversation between Quasar and the hallucination of Captain Marvel. And again, just so much, just characters discussing and talking in this issue and not much going on action-wise. I'm all for a balance of the both, especially in superhero books. But in this one, the balance is way too heavy on the talk and the dialogue and really light and skimpy on the action. So, yeah. That would be my critique of most of the Quasar issues, at least up to this point. Here's something I think they did last issue that they do again here that I like. This is the colors choice, where most of the colors I'm not really into. When it comes to nighttime scenes or scenes where there's no light, obviously the artist has established, Greg Capullo, lots of shadows on the figures and stuff, but the fact that they're using this blue here, I think works really well when it comes for nighttime scenes or places where there is no light. And here's another good example of it here. Those monochromatic blue pages are probably what I find color-wise work best all throughout this issue. And last issue as well. So yeah, just more talking now. So Quasar talking with his father here. And yeah, just, most of this issue is that. And that's why I'm going through it quickly. Just trying to point out illustrations and things in the art that I find interesting. This here, I kind of like it. It's very realistic, almost feels photo referenced, so not characteristically a Greg Capullo face, but I kind of like that. And then this character shows up with his, Kirby Crackle whip, basically to torture Quasar. And this sequence I thought was interesting because it does deal a little bit with body horror. We're not getting, this is still a fairly kids PG comic, so we're not getting blood, but we're getting the black ink blood, which apparently was okay according to the comics code. So, I mean, fairly kind of horrific, other than the fact that the blood isn't red. Yeah, so just a few shots here again of Quasar getting tortured. And then this sequence here, it's kind of chaotic. And in some of the panels, I don't really even recognize where he's being hit. Maybe the crop doesn't help, or the fact that it's monochromatically red all the way throughout for violence, obviously. But there's just something a little bit confusing about this sequence that kind of makes it hard to read. So this guy walks off and leaves Quasar basically to bleed out and die. And this was an interesting thing, I thought, in this one. It's almost like a riff on the X-Babies or something back then. They had just happened with Arthur Adams a few years ago. So I don't know where the inspiration came from, if it was from that. But basically we've got kind of the Grim Reaper here. But, as he says, I'm Kid Reaper. So very kind of, like Scotty Young does a lot of kind of cutesy, crunched up proportion cartoon characters. Well, here's Greg Capullo doing it in 1991. I think doing a pretty good job of it. The character's a little rubbier and bloopier, not quite as much detail on there. So he kind of stands out and has a different aesthetic than all the other characters, which are meant to be more realistic. And surprisingly, the Kid Reaper just stabs Quasar right in the chest there. And that's where we're left with Quasar in this issue. And, this is kind of interesting to me, to hope that next issue Ghost Rider's there and maybe you'll have a bit more action, more interesting stuff. I got to say, compared to the depictions, though, of Ghost Rider back then, just in a few short years, Capullo's going to be doing Spawn and doing great skulls and, lots of expressive artwork. This is pretty kind of tame for him, I think. Again, very Marvel House style, I feel. Not a bad shot per se, but with what was going on with Ghost Rider when he was reintroduced, this newer version, he had Mark Teixeira drawn him, who had kind of an extreme look and anatomy to him. You had him guest starring in those 2 issues of Spider-Man that Todd McFarlane did. So this is, again, a pretty tame version of Ghost Rider as opposed to what we were getting from a lot of the artists at that time. Almost more reminiscent of the older first version of Ghost Rider. This is Danny Ketch. So what was the other guy's name? Johnny Blaze, the original Ghost Rider. And kind of a small weird detail here, but it looks like Ghost Rider's motorcycle is broken. I'm not a motorcycle expert, and I do understand that motorcycles are some of the hardest things to draw, even though this is kind of more of a superhero-y motorcycle and you can get away with more. The fact that the headlights here are facing that direction and the wheel is turned, and the shaft here for the wheel is turned in that direction, just doesn't make much sense to me. From what I know from motorcycles, this is not independent of this, so this should be turning, right? Anytime you turn the wheel, you would want the lights, I know it's Ghost Rider, but just a regular motorcycle, you would want the lights facing the same direction as the wheel, because whatever direction the wheel is facing, that's the direction you're going in. So I don't know if this was done just because of cropping and you're like, oh man, I can't get the wheel there, let's just turn it. But I feel like this element should have been turned at that angle as well. Just a weird looking motorcycle to me. So there you go, guys. Not the most exciting issue of QUASAR, so that's why today's review will be a little bit shorter. That is it for my review of QUASAR 22. If you were watching and you are still subscribed, thank you for being there. I really do appreciate it. If you're watching but you're not subscribed, please do so below. It only takes a quick second for you. It really helps us out, helps the channel grow, helps us towards our goal of hitting that first milestone of 500 subscribers, where YouTube starts helping us out a little bit with the algorithm. So thanks everyone for watching, and have yourselves an awesome day.
Like, subscribe, like, subscribe.
King Comics presents Big Baby, Volume 1, Issues 1 to 13, 204 pages of story and art. King Comics also presents Star Crasher one-shot, 32 pages, cosmic sci-fi surrealist adventure. You can find these fine comics at KINGCOMICS.CA, at MaximusRex13 on Instagram, or on Facebook, MaxRex or Big Baby.